Fair of God in America are the most, and I have the FBI, MI6, and the CIA, all breaking out in night sweats. So, who was this Hannibal of West Africa? And why did America and the West fear him so much? And Nkrumah was the first president of Ghana and the man who single-handedly tore Ghana away from British imperialist clutches in the 1950s. Born into a poor family, the future president was the life of many children. We don't actually know how many. His father, who had many wives, was often not home, choosing instead to work on his goldsmithing business until he died in 1927. But none of this could stop the unbelievably determined Kwame, who when he was 16 was already being paid to teach at his secondary school. Later, Deputy Headmaster James Agri of the prestigious Achimo to school, where Nkrumah was training to be a professional teacher, introduced him to the teachings of the Pan-African giants Jamaica's Marcus Garvey and American civil rights activist W.E.B. Du Bois. As a fully qualified teacher, and after meeting Nigerian activist and future first president of Nigeria, Nnamdi Azikiwe, Nkrumah decided to take his advice and head to America to study him. In 1935, Nkrumah landed in America. Now he might have looked around him and seen the bright lights of New York City and the slick roads and tall buildings, and been tempted to forget all his studious intentions and instead make like any other student in the history of students and live it up and party hard. But then the news got to America that Italy had invaded Ethiopia. And if it wasn't before, everything just got personal. Ethiopia was the symbol of African freedom and sovereignty at the time. It could boast that no European power had ever successfully invaded it. Ethiopia, since the time of the ancient Greeks, had represented Africa to the world. And now that was on the threat too. A foreign groomer changing Africa couldn't come soon enough. So, in America, he got to work. Nkrumah becomes a desperate political Ronin and wanders the streets of Harlem throughout the 1930s, learning from revolutionaries and speakers like Carlos Cook and meeting famous Marxists like C.L.R. James, Raya Dunayevskaya, and Chinese-American Grace Lee Boggs. And this is where America Sherwood says in her book, Kwame Nkrumah, The Years Abroad, that the FBI started to pay attention. These were huge names in the revolutionary scene in America. People who wanted change and an end to what they saw as a corrupt and morally bankrupt political system. And Nkrumah was moving in these dangerous circles. So began the wiretaps, the opening of letters, and the stalking. Now, didn't Nkrumah's air start to burn? Did he know of the surveillance? Had someone tipped him off? Or was he just bored and felt the time had come to leave America? We don't quite know, but we do know that in 1944, Nkrumah packed his bags and sailed for England. But Nkrumah spent little time in England. He returned to Ghana from Liverpool in 1947. And once in Ghana, trouble seemed to follow Nkrumah everywhere. Protests got him noticed by the British authorities. Just a year after his return, Nkrumah led a march that turned into a nationwide riot and was put in jail by the British colonial authorities in Ghana. He was soon released, though, so Nkrumah decides to do something completely different. He used his popularity to start his own media organization, the Accra Evening News. Now it seems here that Nkrumah had learned a thing or two from his days in Europe and America. As soon after founding this newspaper, Nkrumah formed the Radical Committee on Youth Organization, the CYO, with the no-nonsense motto of self-government now. Before Nkrumah was ever the redeemer, he was first on Nkrumah the Restless. He couldn't stand the conventional parties in Ghana and their moderate snail-like approach of one step at a time toward independence. To him, they seemed like controlled opposition. So what did he do? He left and formed his own party, the Convention People's Party. Now here's where Nkrumah's genius comes into play, and his enemies might have greatly underestimated him. Listen to what an FBI informant had to say about Nkrumah back in his American days. He quotes that, "He lacked leadership on the campus and had not shown initiative, and he is not an independent thinker," close quote. The West was about to be sorely mistaken because in 1949, after forming the CPP, Nkrumah did something in Ghana that no West African revolutionary fighting for independence had ever done before. He abandoned the high and mighty, the well-heeled and rich upper classes of Ghanaian society, and started targeting the everyday man, the worker, the poor, the youth. Just a quick pause here. It's worth stressing just how big a deal this was. You see, all across Africa, particularly West Africa, the thing about the fight to gain independence was that, well, it wasn't much of a fight. Nkrumah thought there was something, well, yes, no massa about this. To him, Africans didn't need permission to govern themselves, and the rich and educated of African society alone should not be the ones that dictate the people's destiny. Nkrumah saw that true power was within 99%, and Nkrumah went straight for them. His party, the CPP, mobilized the youth and drove vans festooned in the party's red, white, and green colors across the country, playing music and rallying the masses. The type of people members of his old party probably saw as the raffle. The result, Ghana gave Nkrumah her heart. His popularity with the people she made him, not unstoppable, but inevitable. This was a sea change, a game changer. The colonial government opened negotiations with other leaders of the independence movement, whose names weren't Nkrumah, with promises of greater power and funding, aka bribes. What doesn't Nkrumah do? Sounds the alarm. He called for strikes up and down Ghana, strikes which led to more violence in 1950. Again, Nkrumah was arrested and sent to jail. But like many that would come after him, jail could not hold Nkrumah. In 1951, from a jail cell and using toilet paper to pass on notes to his supporters outside, Nkrumah's party won the parliamentary elections, and the British were forced to free Nkrumah. And once again, Nkrumah wasted no time. As leader of the largest black African party in the Ghanaian parliament, he wrestled concessions from the British, getting them to use Ghana's revenues from cocoa and other natural resources to reinvest in the Ghanaian economy. In 1954, an all-African parliament was elected for the first time in Ghana. And finally, in 1956, the British gave in, after new elections held to determine the popularity of the independence question went against them. Nkrumah's CPP won the day, and the date was set for freedom. That date came on March the 6th, 1957. It's on that day that Nkrumah gave his famous speech. "Come on, blonde, the Bible, I'll send it." This was a monumental moment in the history of modern Black Africa, because over the next few years, other Black African nations would fall like dominoes to the wave of self-government. So what next for Ghana, after blazing the trail for Africa? At this point, given the recent history of African states, you might be expecting that Nkrumah gained power, and Ghana went down the tube, economically became a basket case, a banana republic, same old story that we've become used to when it comes to Africa. Right? Wrong. Nkrumah sees that his new nation has many different tribes and smaller nations within it and predicts Western powers use this against Ghana. So he moves immediately to heavily promote a one-nation concept. He bans tribal flags being flown anywhere in the country. Very much overkill, but most Ghanaians just ignore this law anyway.